And today in the generally assembled studios, we're sitting with State Representative Stephenie Scialabba of the 12th Legislative District in Butler County. Representative, welcome to the studio, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Good morning. And for everyone watching, this is my off-duty outfit, so I will be on the floor in more appropriate attire, but this is how I usually look when it's just me as a mom doing my job. So I am state representative of the 12th District in Cranberry Township and some of the surrounding areas in Butler County outside of Pittsburgh and right on the corridor to Erie. So 12th District is the greatest district in my humble opinion, but I digress. So started out my career as an attorney. I still keep my law license active, but I'm not doing nearly as much as I used to. So started out in healthcare and mergers and acquisitions, not malpractice, but compliance, regulatory compliance, things like that. And got to know the inner workings of our health system, for better and worse, pretty intimately. From there, got into HIPAA, data privacy, cybersecurity, and that was my bread and butter for a better part of a decade.
This really clues in. So what we're talking about today is right up your alley. You're a mom. You practiced law in fields that apply to what's going on here, healthcare and the online field. So really what we're talking about now is an attack, if you will, on parental rights and not having access to what's going on in your kids' lives. And the latest here today is the governor has awarded a contract and with a new company for mental health services for kids, and it's a little bit disturbing. Tell us a little bit about what is going on here, what this company is, and where they're from, why this is a little disturbing.
Sure. So it's called Kooth, Kooth, and it's essentially an online digital mental health services platform. And, by very nature of its title, people want to rally behind it. Mental health, how can that be a bad thing?
Yeah, it's got to be good.
It's got to be good, right? Well, it's not good because I don't think it's actually mental health. So my concern lies in the fact of several things, but mainly that you have unlicensed, not even professionals. They're not medical professionals providing advice, if you even want to call it advice, to these kids. They're school-age children. I am very involved, and maybe not all parents are, but kids thrive when their parents are involved, so that's something we can get into later about why the degradation of the family unit and the relationship between parent and child. But I want to know when I take my son to the doctor that he's going to a good doctor, right? I'm not going to take him to somebody who he has a broken arm and the doctor's looking at his foot.
Yeah,
right?
you want the doctor who's the pro
right.
from Dover about broken arms.
Right, that's exactly right. And so if I go into an exam room with my son and they're looking at the wrong thing, completely misdiagnosing, I'm thinking, who is this quack? Why are we here? And just because we're dealing with mental health, that doesn't make it okay to now start investigating and exploring all these conditions that don't apply to your child. And so you're in this Kooth realm. You don't have the protection of your parents, coming from the child's perspective. The parents are completely removed. They don't have notice that their kid's even using this, let alone requiring parental consent or letting the parents sit in there with the child if they're doing this on school property.
And even worse, this is an online service,
They
so
can
that
do
the
it
kid
anywhere,
they can do it anywhere, and the
anytime.
kid doesn't even know who they're dealing with.
Right. Kid doesn't know who they're dealing with. They can do it anywhere, anytime, as much as they want. And in fact, in the months of June, July, and August, these schools and Kooth are teaming up with celebrities to incentivize kids to, quote, explore other topics and chat, comment, post, engage with this platform on things that could be completely irrelevant to them to rack up points to meet a celebrity in the new school year. What kind of a medical professional says, yeah, let's explore if you have, let's put it in the physical realm, it's easier for people to understand. Let's explore if you have a communicative disease, right, or tuberculosis, even though you have a broken arm. That would be insanity. The more that you engage with unlicensed professionals, you chat with people who are, there's a big difference, maybe not from 30 to 36, but from 12 to 18, there's a huge gap in maturity. And there's a huge gap in what you should be exposed to, right? We insulate our kids. That's why we have an elementary school. We don't put them in with high schoolers. We have a middle school. We don't put them in with college, right? Yet now we have this online platform, unregulated, no parent supervision, right? And we have 18-year-olds talking about gender ideology or suicidal ideation with 13-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds.
More and more you see, for some reason, that they're pushing parents out of the lives of their kids, especially when it comes to schools. The NEA has been saying, hey, these are our kids. You know, it's a messed up philosophy. And you touched on it earlier. Kids do better in school when their parents are involved.
And I think I would say they do better in life when their parents are involved. And I'm not saying anything earth-shattering here. But, there's a couple schools of thought. The one is conspiracy, right? Let's put the conspiracy aside, the whole social agenda aside for a minute. And let's take this approach that hopefully will get people to actually listen to what I'm saying, right? Let's assume best case scenario, and this is a major assumption, right? But let's assume that it's just a general idea of actually truly good intentions, wanting to do something right. I have my doubts, but let's take that path.
Let's say that
Right.
most people come to it
Right.
with that intent.
Let's say, right. So let's say that they come to this with a good intention of we want to help kids. That's fine. But the problem is when you start to sacrifice the majority of children's well-being to help 1% of them with a way that doesn't help them. So this not only does it fail to actually address problems, you're risking the health of all these other kids in the process. And let's say there's 1% out there, and I'm sure, don't quote me on the number, but there are very delicate home life situations. There are unsupportive parents. This is nothing new under the sun. But we have protocols and processes in place to help those kids already that don't sacrifice and jeopardize the futures and the health of the other 99%. And I think that's where some of this is coming from. We keep catering and tailoring to the minority of everything and at the sacrifice of the majority. At some point, you're letting all these exception type of situations completely consume the rest of the world. And it doesn't make sense.
It comes back to it makes you wonder if the cure that we've prescribed is worse than the disease.
That's exactly right.
And so this really brings us to what we're going to do about it. And finally, at least you're in a position as a mom, as a lawmaker, and as a person who understands the law to say, I'm going to try to do something about this. Let's push back a little bit as parents and have a little bit of sense here. Not remove anything, not take away any services, but make sure parents are involved. What would your legislation do?
So I have a couple ways of trying to attack this. The very first and foremost, and I recognize we're in the minority, so I don't know if this will actually go anywhere or not, but in terms of legislation. But what I know will go somewhere is communicating this to parents, because they're all blind. We're in the blind here. No one has any idea. These things don't happen, and in the public eye. They happen in the dark. They happen in Treasury grants that no one's paying attention to. And so my first method of attack is getting the message out and telling parents, this is what's going on, and you need to know. So that's my first thing. The second thing is my legislation, which is going to require advance notice, not just notice of, hey, our school district has entered into a contract with Kooth. No. You need to give parents a chance to object. So it's notice of their intention to enter into a contract with Kooth, or their consideration of entering into a contract with Kooth or Kooth-like services. And the problem is, too, now, this is a statewide contract. Any school, we have 31 or 30 right now that are in this, they don't need their own separate thing. They can opt in at any point for free because it's a statewide contract for these public school districts. So the one piece is telling parents in advance so they have a chance to object to this. The second piece is requiring that to the extent the schools are facilitating or providing access to these resources, they are getting specific written parental consent and permission to provide these resources, or even tell the school child, about these resources before they do it. The third thing is, if they're letting these students use these resources on school grounds or during school hours, they have to permit the parent in. And they got to share these records subject to HIPAA and any other potentially applicable privacy laws. They have to share these records with the parent. They can't require a right to know request for a parent to find out that their kid is using Kooth.
These seem like reasonable guidelines. It doesn't seem like we're actually going out of our way here. We're saying, hey, we're not saying a kid can't use it. We're not saying you can't opt in. All we're saying is, if you're doing it, let the parent know so that the parent can be involved. I don't understand how we got to a point that we think that cutting the parent out benefits the child. We want what's best for the child in all these
Right.
cases. How is cutting the parent out and not letting them know what's going on helping?
Do you know what's interesting about that? There's this other piece out there that I'm fighting. My whole focus, it's funny how this happens, but this is my first term. And you come in raring to go and you want to do X, Y, and Z, right? But then that starts to mold. And yes, those are still important to me, and I'm a solid vote for conservative ideas, but my focus is education. So it's taking away the parents, and we are now getting into CRSE guidelines too. And it's culturally relevant, sustaining education standards. We're again seeing it from the administrative executive branch, right? Under the guise of regulations or guidelines. They say it's not regulations, it's a whole murky water again. But the Pennsylvania Department of Education has put out 9 new competencies, effective now, effective this fall, for existing teachers with certifications and new teachers to obtain a certification. They've got to satisfy 9 new competencies. Do you know what some of those are? I quote, know and acknowledge that microaggressions are real. Believe that X, Y, and Z. They're actually mandating what parents or what teachers must believe. But interestingly enough, one of those points, one of the competencies, says that you must believe, teachers must believe, acknowledge, etc., that families and parents want what's best for their child. Now, how do you reconcile these inconsistencies? We've got Kuth and those people, the supporters, on one hand saying, keep the parents out. But then whenever it comes to saying that diverse parents want what's best for the child, not anyone else. It's only, again, that minority. Only the minority of people could want what's best for their child, and that's not true. I like to think that the majority of parents want what's best for their child.